The gray sky hung heavy over the city, pressing down like a weight that refused to lift. The sharp slap of skin against skin echoed in the sterile hospital room, a sound so violent it seemed to cleave the air in two. For a moment, the world stopped. The heart monitor beside the bed went wild, its accelerated beeping a frantic drum. As the pregnant woman staggered from the impact, one hand flew instinctively to her swollen belly. The other went to the side of her face, where her husband's palm had left a furious red mark. Gasps filled the room. A nurse holding a clipboard dropped it, papers scattering across the linoleum floor like startled birds. Another patient in the hallway stopped dead, clinging to the doorframe in disbelief. The fluorescent lights hummed above, illuminating every detail without mercy, as if the universe itself demanded that nothing about this moment be hidden. Ellie Carter never imagined her life would shatter in a hospital room. At 6 months pregnant, she had come in for a simple checkup, expecting to hear the comforting rhythm of her baby's heart. Instead, she now stood trembling, cheeks wet with tears, staring at the man she once believed was her protector. Blake Dalton, her millionaire husband, was only inches away, his jaw clenched and fists balled at his sides, as if daring anyone to intervene. His tailored suit seemed absurdly out of place in the clinical environment, the dark fabric a cruel contrast to the pale green of the hospital walls. "Stop making a scene," he hissed, his voice low but laced with venom. His cold eyes glittered with fury, not remorse. Ellie could barely form words. The sting of the slap still coursed through her cheek. But the real pain was deeper. It was betrayal. The certainty that the man who had promised to care for her had chosen to humiliate her in front of strangers, in front of the child she carried. The room was no longer silent. A chorus of voices rose like an unstoppable tide. "Did he just hit her?" a nurse whispered, her voice trembling. "She's pregnant! Get security!" another yelled. "Oh my God! Get the doctor!" a patient from the hallway exclaimed. All eyes turned to Blake, and for the first time, his composure wavered. He sneered and tried to play it down. He waved his hand dismissively, as if nothing serious had happened, but the evidence was undeniable. Ellie's face was flushed and swelling. The monitor was screaming with every erratic beat of her baby's heart, and in the corner of the room, a small red light blinked relentlessly. The security camera mounted on the ceiling had caught it all. Blake's voice grew louder, harsher, as if he could drown out the truth. "You don't understand," he barked. "She provoked me. She's been hysterical all morning. This is nothing." But his excuses only ignited more outrage. A nurse stepped between him and Ellie, her body tense with fear and defiance. "This is nothing?" she replied, her voice firm. "She is carrying a child. We all saw what you did." The weight of the moment was closing in from all sides. Ellie's heart was pounding. Her breath came in uneven bursts. She clutched her belly, whispering a silent promise to her unborn child. She would survive this, no matter the cost. In the hallway beyond the open door, more witnesses crowded around. Some held up their phones, the glow of recording screens illuminating their faces. The truth was no longer confined to that hospital room. It was spreading outward, unstoppable, carried by every blinking light, every shocked whisper, every trembling hand holding a camera. And at that instant, before the chaos could settle, a single thought pierced the noise. This was only the beginning. The hospital room did not calm after the slap. Instead, it sank into a strange, suffocating silence. A silence that presses on your chest and makes it hard to breathe. Nurses exchanged uneasy glances, their hands suspended in the air, as if any movement would shatter the fragile pause. A patient in the hallway covered her mouth, eyes wide, unsure whether to intervene or retreat. Ellie sat on the edge of the bed, her breath catching, her hand still trembling on her cheek. The sting from her husband's palm remained, but what hurt most was the humiliation. She felt exposed, not from torn clothes, but from the way dozens of strangers had witnessed her intimate nightmare. Blake remained standing straight in his navy suit, his shoes gleaming on the sterile floor. He adjusted his cufflinks with a rehearsed calmness, as if that simple gesture could erase what had happened. "Let's not overreact," he murmured, his tone firm and calculated. He had spent years controlling narratives in boardrooms, twisting stories until they favored him. He believed he could do the same here. "Please," Ellie whispered, her soft accent slipping through her fear. "Not here. Not like this." Her words cracked in the air, fragile as glass. But Blake seized on them. "See?" he said to the room, pointing at her as if she were the problem. "She admits it. She's overly dramatic. Hormones. Stress. You know how pregnant women can be." His cold eyes swept the audience, daring them to contradict him. A nurse shook her head, muttering to herself. Another pulled out her phone, her thumb hovering over the emergency call button. The silent resistance around him was growing, a wall Blake couldn't charm his way through. Ellie's thoughts were spinning out of control. Memories of her adored life rushed back. When he'd bought her roses every Friday, the promise he whispered when they moved into the penthouse. "You'll never want for anything." But those memories were poisoned now. She understood that every gesture had come with invisible strings, strings of control that had tightened until she could barely breathe. She looked at her reflection in the metallic panel of the monitor. The woman looking back was pale, eyes puffy with tears, lips trembling. Was this what she had become? Someone who flinched at her husband's voice, who swallowed her words before they were spoken. The sound of typing cut through her thoughts. At the nursing station, the receptionist was already drafting a report. Each click of the keyboard was a nail being hammered into Blake's carefully polished reputation. "Enough of this circus!" Blake exploded. His voice was louder now, the mask cracking. "I am a respected man. I've given more to this city than any of you ever will. Don't think you can judge me for a misunderstanding." Ellie closed her eyes. A single tear tracked down her cheek. She wanted to scream, to speak the truth, to stop living in his shadow. But fear outweighed her voice. The baby moved inside her, a reminder that she wasn't alone in this. The silence grew heavier, but beneath it ran a current of change. The nurses were no longer just staff. They had become witnesses. The patients were no longer mere spectators. They were a jury in an impromptu trial, and the blinking red light of the camera on the ceiling was the judge who never closed its eyes. Ellie opened her mouth, but stopped herself. She looked at her husband, then at the people around, and finally at the light above. The thought that remained was silent, but piercing. Someday, this truth would be exposed, and when it was, no amount of wealth would be able to protect him. The hospital walls did not hide the truth. They carried it in whispers that slid through air ducts and echoed in corners. By the time Ellie left her appointment that afternoon, the story had already begun to spread. A public slap could not be erased. Yet Blake walked beside her as if nothing had happened, his hand firm on her elbow as if guiding her, though to her it felt more like a grasp. He leaned in close, his voice barely audible but sharp enough to hurt. "Don't embarrass me again. You smile when people look. You thank me when I talk. Do you understand?" Ellie nodded weakly, but inside, her thoughts were screaming. At what point had her opinion stopped being her own? When had her life become a script written entirely by him? The first sign came with money. Blake had always controlled every account, every credit card, every bill. At first, it seemed like care, a husband ensuring his pregnant wife didn't have to worry about finances. But the truth was clear now. She couldn't buy a thing without his approval. He set weekly limits, reviewed every receipt, and questioned every expense with an auditor's severity. "Do you really need another brand of prenatal vitamins?" He'd sneered one night, waving the receipt in her face. "I already picked one. Use it. Don't waste my money." The second sign came with friendships, or rather, their absence. Calls from her uni mate went unanswered because Blake had blocked the number. Messages from her cousin appeared only briefly before he deleted them. When she asked why, he'd shrugged and said, "They distract you. They don't want what's best for us. I do." And yet, the loneliness in her chest grew heavier with each passing day. The third sign was her medical appointments. Every appointment went through him. He insisted on being present not to be supportive, but to monitor. When she'd mentioned to her obstetrician that she felt stressed, Blake had cut in. "She's fine. She worries too much. Just focus on the baby, not her feelings." The doctor's eyes had landed on Ellie, concern hidden beneath the professional mask. But Blake's dominance had devoured the moment. Then came the phone, her last fragile link to independence. One night she discovered a strange app installed, hidden among folders. The icon was faint, but its meaning was clear. Location, message, and call tracking. When she confronted him, his response was simple, accompanied by a cold smile. "I need to know you're safe. You should thank me." The walls of control were closing in tighter every day. Yet for all his power, Blake couldn't control the witnesses. Small cracks were appearing in his carefully constructed mask. At the chemist, an employee noticed how he'd snatched a receipt from her hand. At the supermarket, a cashier had seen him criticize her choice of fruit. At the hospital, a nurse had sensed the flinch in her eyes when he raised his voice. These strangers hadn't said anything out loud, but their gazes remained, heavy with silent judgment. And then came the first public humiliation. They were at a baby boutique, surrounded by pastel-colored cots and tiny clothes. Ellie's eyes lit up at a soft blanket with embroidered stars. She reached out a hand, her heart swelling as she imagined her son wrapped in something so gentle. Blake's voice cut through the sweetness like a knife. "That blanket is ridiculous. Are you thinking about the cost or the practicality? Are you only concerned with appearances?" His words rang through the store, echoing in the ears of every shopper. A silence fell. Heads turned. Mothers hugged their children tighter. Ellie stood frozen, her face burning with shame. She wanted to sink into the floor, to disappear from the eyes of strangers. But the truth was now undeniable. The man she had married was no longer her protector. He was her jailer, and every witness who heard his cruelty became another thread in a web he couldn't unspool. The store remained tense after his outburst, as if everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. Ellie was frozen beside the blanket shelf, her hand still hovering over the soft fabric she had wanted to buy. Her cheeks burned not just from his criticism, but from the certainty that strangers saw what she suffered in private. Blake's jaw was tight. His lips were pressed into a thin line. His eyes swept the place as if daring anyone to intervene. His nostrils flared with each shallow breath. The weight of others' judgment was consuming him. He could feel the stares on his back, the whispers of repulsion running like fire through the store. And in that moment, his control started to crack. Ellie looked at him, her eyes full of tears, but with a flicker of defiance. That flicker was enough to ignite him. He took one step closer, his hand clenched into a fist before opening again. His fingers were trembling. "Stop looking at me like that," he hissed, his voice so sharp it sliced the silence. "Don't make me repeat myself." A young mother hugged her child tighter, moving away. A sales assistant froze behind the counter, her fingers suspended over the keys. In the corner, a teenager held his phone up higher. The small red dot on the screen confirmed that everything was being recorded. Blake's hand shot out, grabbing Ellie's wrist. His grip was iron, digging into her skin until she flinched. "You are my wife," he said through gritted teeth, his voice louder now, trembling with contained rage. "You will obey me." Ellie tried to pull away, mumbling a plea. "Please, not here, not in front of them." Her voice was shaking, laden with desperation and shame. But Blake's control was gone. In a sudden, brutal movement, he pulled her towards him and hit her across the face again. The sound cracked in the boutique like thunder. The shelves rattled. A glass display case shivered, and a collective scream erupted from the customers. Ellie staggered back, lost her footing. Her belly moved dangerously as she fell against a shelf of folded clothes. A pile of onesies tumbled to the floor, scattering like fallen leaves. She held herself up just before she collapsed, one hand on her belly and the other clinging to the edge of the shelf. The store became chaos. Voices were raised, urgent and horrified. "Call the police!" someone yelled. "Get her away from him!" another cried. "My God, he hit her again. She's pregnant." Every angle of the scene was being captured. Phones were held high, cameras flashing, and in the corner above the counter, the security lens glowed relentlessly. The evidence multiplied, showing Blake not as the polished millionaire he pretended to be, but as a violent abuser exposed under the fluorescent light. Ellie's heart was racing, not just from fear, but from the baby moving inside her. A kick that reminded her she was fighting for more than just herself. She placed her palm on her belly, whispering in silence, praying for her son to hold on. Blake, breathing heavily, understood too late that the room had turned against him. Dozens of eyes were piercing him, some full of fury, others with compassion for the woman he had hit. He tried to speak, to regain authority, but his words crumbled. "She provoked me," he barked, though the defense sounded hollow, swallowed by the chorus of condemnation. The sales assistant's voice rose, firm and clear. "Sir, this isn't just between the two of you anymore. We all saw it. It's on video. You can't hide it." Blake's face turned red, veins standing out on his temples. For the first time, a flicker of fear appeared in his expression, but it was too late. The damage was done. The proof was undeniable, sealed forever in the blinking lights of phones and cameras that never looked away. And as Ellie slowly straightened up, her face marked by pain and defiance, the thought running through the room was impossible to ignore. This was no longer a private marriage. It was a crime exposed in plain sight. The silence that followed the second blow didn't last. It broke almost instantly, replaced by voices raised in indignation, by hurried footsteps on the boutique floor, by the sound of justice waking up in ordinary people. "Back away!" ordered a nurse who was coincidentally shopping. She pushed through the crowd and placed herself between Ellie and Blake. Her small body was trembling, but her eyes burned with determination. She held up both arms as if she could physically protect the pregnant woman from another blow. Ellie clung to the edge of the shelf, her knees weak. Tears blurred her vision, but she felt the change around her. The strangers were no longer silent. They had become her defenders. A sales assistant ran to her, holding her arm to give her firmness. Another woman pulled tissues from her bag and gently handed them to Ellie. "This is not private anymore," the nurse said firmly, her voice cutting through the chaos. This is an assault. She needs medical attention. Someone call the police, now! A young man held his phone high, the camera fixed on Blake. It's already recorded, he said, his voice steady despite the tension. Everything is saved. He can't deny it. Blake's face twisted with fury. He tried to lunge forward, but two men stepped in, blocking his way. One was a retired firefighter, broad-shouldered and unshakable. The other, a father, who just moments ago was holding his young child. They stood firm against him. You touch her again, the firefighter warned in a deep, booming voice, and you won't be walking out of here. The boutique was no longer a shop. It had transformed into a courtroom, with witnesses lined up, cameras acting as clerks, and strangers playing the role of the jury. The air was vibrating with determination, each person refusing to allow the violence to continue unanswered. Ellie felt herself being guided to a chair near the counter. Someone placed a light jacket over her shoulders. Another put a bottle of cold water in her hands. The kindness brought new tears, but this time they were tears of gratitude. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel completely alone. The sales assistant called emergency services, her voice clear and urgent. We need police and an ambulance immediately. Pregnant woman assaulted in our store. The assailant is still here. We have video and multiple witnesses. Each word tightened the trap around Blake. His power had always been built on silence, on secrecy, on the shadows where no one else could see. But now the lights were on. The cameras weren't blinking, and his empire of intimidation was crumbling in front of him. He tried one last time to give orders, clinging to the illusion of control. Do you know who I am? You can't treat me like this. I'll ruin all of you. His voice cracked, and the threat sounded more like desperation than dominance. No one backed down. The firefighter crossed his arms. The nurse stood firm. The sales assistant held her phone steady, recording every gesture of his face. Ellie pressed the tissue against her cheek, feeling the heat of the swelling. Her baby moved inside her again, reminding her of the life that depended on her strength. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "This is not the end. I will survive." The paramedics arrived first, their uniforms crisp, their voices calm but firm. They lifted Ellie carefully. They checked her pulse. They asked her to describe the pain. One placed a monitor on her belly, and the familiar sound of her baby's heartbeat filled the room like a fragile song of hope. Moments later, the police entered. Two officers, serious and alert, took firm steps into the boutique. The crowd parted for them, phones still held high, the evidence flowing. Blake straightened his suit, trying to regain dignity, but the sweat on his forehead gave him away. The nurse pointed directly at him. "He's the man. We all saw him. She's pregnant. He hit her twice." The officer nodded, pulling out a notebook while his partner collected the security footage from the sales assistant. "Thank you. This is no longer just a domestic matter. This is a crime scene." Ellie closed her eyes, the sound of her son's heartbeat constant in her ears. The hands of strangers were steadying her shoulders, anchoring her in the storm. And in that moment, she understood a new truth. She was no longer voiceless. The evidence, the witnesses, and the compassion of strangers had given her a power she thought was lost. When the police escorted Blake out of the boutique, the story had already escaped those four walls. It was in the hands of strangers, captured on trembling screens, spread in the infinite stream of the internet. The first video appeared within minutes. A short clip, barely 20 seconds long, showed Blake's hand hitting his pregnant wife, followed by the horrified screams and exclamations of the people present. The title read simply, "Millionaire hits his pregnant wife in public." In an hour, The clip had been shared thousands of times. Ellie sat in the back of the ambulance, her cheek resting against an ice pack. She listened to the faint hum of the paramedics' radio. Fragments of conversation floated in the air. But what caught her attention were the sounds of notifications on the phones of the people around. Each alert meant another person had seen the truth. Each alert meant the silence had been broken. At first, the comments were small, scattered. Just a ripple, disgusting. How could anyone do this? Protect her and the baby. But the ripples grew into waves. Soon there were hundreds, then thousands of comments. People were demanding his arrest, his resignation from boards, his expulsion from elite clubs. Strangers who had never seen Ellie were now speaking her name with outrage and compassion. The media picked it up quickly. A local reporter tweeted, "Breaking news. Well-known investor Blake Dalton accused of assaulting his pregnant wife in public. Video evidence circulating online." The clip aired on the evening news, framed by flashy headlines and anchors who barely concealed their repulsion. Inside Dalton Enterprises, the fallout was immediate. His assistant, loyal for years, watched as her inbox filled with red flag issues. Urgent termination request. Board meeting called. Suspension pending. Business partners pulled out, first quietly, then loudly. Email after email severed ties. "We cannot be associated with this behavior. Our contract is indefinitely suspended." By midnight, the video had reached 1 million views. Hashtags flooded social media. @Justice for Ellie trended alongside @Boycott Dalton. The comment sections were boiling with fury. One person wrote, "If he treats the mother of his child like this, imagine how he treats his employees." Another added, "Money can't protect a monster forever." Blake's face, once the cover of magazines as the image of success, now appeared in memes and scathing articles. Screenshots of him raising his hand were shared with captions like, "This is the real Dalton." Ellie was calm in the hospital room. An IV bag hung beside her bed. The steady sound of her baby's heartbeat filled the monitor, a reminder that life went on despite the chaos. A nurse showed her a headline on her phone. Ellie's own face, swollen but unbroken, stared back at her, accompanied by words that tightened her throat. "She deserves better. She deserves justice." Meanwhile, Blake was pacing back and forth in the police station holding cell, stripped of his expensive jacket, reduced to the same gray bench as any other criminal. He yelled into the phone when his lawyer finally called. "Fix this. Make it go away." But even his lawyer's voice wavered. "The evidence is everywhere. We can't make millions of people unsee what they saw." The humiliation was spreading faster than wildfire, not through exaggeration, but through irrefutable proof. Each replay of the video was another nail in the coffin of his reputation. Each comment was another verdict. Each share was another reminder that he could no longer buy silence. That night, Ellie closed her eyes, exhausted, but for the first time in months, she didn't feel powerless. The world had seen what he had done. The world had decided to believe her. And Blake Dalton, the man who once believed his wealth could shield him from consequences, was learning the most brutal truth of all. There was nowhere to hide from the eyes of millions. The steady beeping of the fetal monitor filled the hospital room. Its rhythm was calming and reassuring. For the first time in hours, Ellie allowed herself to breathe without flinching. She was lying on crisp, white sheets, one hand resting gently on her rounded belly, listening to the tiny heartbeats that reminded her why she had endured. The chaos of the boutique, the phones recording, the voices of strangers. All of it seemed distant now. In its place was the serene determination of medical professionals who focused only on her and her child. A doctor came in, his expression calm but purposeful. He checked the monitor and then looked at Ellie with firm eyes. "Your baby's heart is beating strong," he said softly. "There are no signs of distress. We'll keep you monitored overnight, just to be sure." His words washed over her like cool water on a burn. A wave of relief swept through her chest, and tears welled in her eyes. A nurse adjusted her IV and offered a gentle smile. "You're not alone," she whispered. "We've documented everything. The medical report will reflect what was done to you. No one can erase it." Ellie nodded, her voice trembling as she replied, "Thank you." For so long she had been told her pain was invisible. It had been dismissed as hysteria. It had been ignored as weakness. Now her injuries were being measured, recorded, turned into evidence that no one could deny. Moments later, the sound of firm footsteps echoed in the hallway. 2 police officers came in, notebooks in hand. Their presence was serious and official. One greeted her with a slight nod of respect. "Mrs. Dalton, we need to take your statement. It won't take long, but it's important to get everything down while it's fresh in your mind." Ellie hesitated. Her heart pounded. She had been silenced so many times that speaking now felt dangerous. But then she looked at the monitor again, with the little peaks and valleys of her child's heartbeat glowing on the screen. She remembered the nurse's words. "You're not alone." Taking a shaky breath, she began to speak. She described the slap at the hospital earlier that day. She explained the grip on her wrist at the boutique, the words he'd spat in her face, the second blow that sent her flying against the shelves. She gave every detail, no matter how small. With each word, her voice grew stronger, as if reclaiming the truth was giving a part of herself back. The officer wrote quickly, nodding. When she finished, he looked her in the eyes. "This is domestic violence. We have the video, the security footage, the medical reports, and now your statement. Together, they form a strong case. You won't face this alone. We'll immediately file for an emergency protection order." The phrase was heavy, but also like a shield. An emergency protection order. A barrier marked by the law, something Blake couldn't ignore with his money or his arrogance. Within an hour, the documents were ready. An employee came in with the papers that only needed her signature. The order forbade Blake from any kind of contact with her. No calls, no visits, no letters. The police officer explained that if he tried to approach her, he could be arrested on the spot. Ellie signed with a trembling hand. Then she lay back as the pen slipped from her fingers. She felt lighter, as if a weight she had carried for years was lifting from her shoulders. The ink on the paper was more than a legal safeguard. It was proof that her voice mattered, that her suffering had been acknowledged. Her lawyer arrived shortly after, a woman known for defending victims of abuse. She spoke with firmness, filling the room with strength. "We are not just going to protect you. We are going to hold him accountable. You have more allies than you think." Ellie placed her hand on the monitor again, her palm resting on her belly. The peaks of her son's heartbeat marked a steady tempo, like a drum of hope. For the first time, she felt not just like a victim, but like a mother ready to fight for her son's future. The room grew quieter as the evening wore on, but Ellie could feel the weight of the world reaching her through her phone. Messages began to appear from people she hadn't spoken to in years. Old friends, distant relatives, even acquaintances who had once visited their house. Each message carried a piece of the puzzle she had been too blind or too scared to see. A friend from uni wrote, "I remember the bruises you tried to hide back then. I wanted to speak up, but you always said you'd tripped." Another message from a former neighbor said, "He yelled so loud one night we almost called the police. I wish we had." Ellie stared at the screen, her hands trembling. Every word confirmed what her heart had known, but her mind had buried. This wasn't the first time. It had never just been a slap, never just an outburst. It had always been a pattern, carefully hidden by Blake's charm and money. Her lawyer sat by the bed, a pile of folders in her lap. She opened them one by one. Inside were photographs of old bruises, taken in secret by a friend months ago. A purple mark on her arm, the shadow of a handprint on her side. Each image was a scar she had carried in silence, now exposed to the light. "These," the lawyer said firmly, "prove that this isn't an isolated incident. It's a repeated cycle of abuse, combined with the video from the boutique, the medical reports, and your statement. It builds an undeniable case." The nurse came in again, with a manila envelope in her hand. "This just arrived from the hospital archives," she explained. Inside were copies of previous medical reports, notes from different visits, each one listing injuries that had been justified with phrases like accidental fall or patient claims she ran into furniture. The nurse's voice hardened. "These are consistent with what we see in victims of long-term domestic violence." Ellie's chest tightened. She remembered those visits, the excuses she had invented, the forced smile so they would stop asking questions. Now the lies had unraveled. Her truth was written in black ink on medical forms. Her lawyer placed another piece of evidence on the table, the printed transcript of text messages. Blake's words were poison even on paper. "You are nothing without me. Don't forget who pays for everything. One word from me, and you'll lose everything you care about." A shiver ran down Ellie's spine as she read them, but she also felt something else. The truth was no longer hers alone to carry. It belonged to the records, to the witnesses, to the files that were growing by the hour. Later that night, a detective arrived to interview her again. He listened intently as the lawyer presented the new evidence, poring over photos, reports, and transcripts. He nodded, his expression grave, but determined. "This changes the scope of the case. We're not talking about a single incident anymore. This is a history of abuse. The prosecution will want to file full charges." The words settled in the room like a final verdict. A history of abuse. It hurt to hear, but it was also liberating. For the first time, her suffering had been acknowledged as part of a bigger truth, not as a mistake or a misunderstanding. Ellie brought her hand to the swelling on her cheek and then lowered it to her belly. "He can't hurt us anymore," she whispered. Her voice was soft but firm, charged with a strength she thought was lost. The detective carefully collected the evidence, sealing it in official bags. "Mrs. Dalton, you have been incredibly brave. The truth is on your side now, and it will speak louder than all of his lies." When the door closed behind him, Ellie leaned back against the pillows. Her baby's heartbeats continued to sound on the monitor, a constant reminder that she had survived, and that survival was only the beginning. The truth was now in plain sight, and there was no going back. The days in the hospital ran together at first, filled with checkups, signatures, and whispered conversations. Yet with each sunrise, Ellie felt a change inside her. She was no longer just clinging to survival. She was beginning to reclaim her life. The first decision came quickly. She wouldn't go back to the penthouse. That place, with its glass walls and sterile marble, had never been a home. It had been a stage where Blake controlled the spotlights. With the help of her father and a social worker, she found a modest house on the other side of the city. It was small, but every morning the sunlight streamed through the windows and warmed the hardwood floors. When she first walked in, she whispered. "This feels like mine." The second decision was harder, but necessary. She called her lawyer and asked to file for divorce and custody. Sitting upright in her hospital bed, she signed the papers with firm hands. The lawyer nodded in approval. "Now you are building your own path." Her days began to take on new rhythms. Therapy sessions twice a week, meetings in support groups where other women shared stories that mirrored her own. Each meeting chipped away at the sense of isolation, reminding her that she wasn't alone. She learned to speak her truth without trembling, to listen without judging, to heal without shame. One afternoon, her therapist handed her a small notebook. "Write down one decision each day that belongs only to you," she advised. The first entry read, "I chose the blanket with stars for my baby." That simple choice, once ridiculed by Blake, now felt like a victory. Ellie also found strength in work again. A former colleague reached out, offering her a consulting project. At first, she hesitated, worried she was too fragile, too distracted. But when she sat at the desk in her new house, her laptop glowing, she felt her mind awaken in ways it hadn't in years. Each completed task reminded her that she was unable, and independent, and her father became her anchor. He visited often, bringing groceries, fixing small things around the house, reminding her with his quiet presence that family could be firm and safe. One night, he placed a hand on her shoulder and said, "You are stronger than you think. You are not just going to survive this. You are going to overcome it." Symbolism began to root itself in her daily life. The cot she chose for her son was white, simple yet solid, a symbol of a new beginning. The blanket with embroidered stars, folded carefully inside, became her reminder that she could make decisions free of fear. Every time she touched it, she felt that the circle of her story was closing, from the humiliation at the boutique to the strength in her own home. Ellie also became more open in her community. She agreed to speak at a local women's shelter, her voice trembling at first, but growing stronger as she shared her story. "I thought I was invisible," she told the group. "I thought no one would believe me, but the truth has a way of finding the light, and once it does, no one can take it away from you." The women listened, some with tears in their eyes, others with fists clenched in solidarity. In those moments, she understood that her survival wasn't just for her or her son. It was for every woman who had been silenced, for every voice still trapped in fear. With the passing of weeks and months, the scars on her face faded, but the strength in her eyes grew brighter. She was no longer the trembling woman in the hospital bed. She was a mother, a survivor, and the leader of her own life. And as she placed the star blanket gently in the cot, she whispered, "We are safe now. This home is ours." The courtroom was full on the day of the final hearing. Reporters crowded the stairs, microphones held high as flashes illuminated the gray morning sky. Inside, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. For months, the world had followed every detail of the case, and now it was coming to its conclusion. Ellie sat at the front, her father by her side, her lawyer to her left. Her hands rested on her rounded belly, firm and calm. The baby moved gently, as if sensing that the long battle was about to end. She closed her eyes for a moment, drawing strength from the steady rhythm of her son's heartbeat that she had heard so many times on the hospital monitor. Blake entered the room with slumped shoulders. He was no longer the polished millionaire who once attracted stares. His suit hung loose, his face pale. His eyes darted nervously. The weight of the evidence had stripped him of arrogance. The videos, the photographs, the text messages, the testimonies, All of it stood taller than he did now. The judge's voice resonated with clarity. This court finds Mr. Blake Dalton guilty of domestic violence and assault. Furthermore, he is liable for emotional and physical damages. Custody of the unborn child is granted solely to Mrs. Ellie Dalton. Mr. Dalton is prohibited from all contact with his wife or child. No. A murmur ran through the room, followed by a wave of comments. Blake's face fell apart. His mouth opened as if to protest, but no words came out. He had built his empire on intimidation, but in that moment, surrounded by evidence and witnesses, he was powerless. Ellie's lawyer leaned towards her and whispered, "It's over. You're free." Tears filled her eyes, but they were not tears of pain. They were tears of liberation. She took her father's hand, squeezing it tightly, anchoring herself in the reality that she had survived and that justice had been served. In the weeks that followed, the world's attention shifted from the scandal to resilience. The media published stories not just about a wealthy man's downfall, but about the strength of the woman he had tried to silence. Ellie became a quiet symbol of survival, not because she sought fame, but because she chose to live openly and without fear. Her days took on a new meaning. She prepared the baby's room in her house, painting the walls a soft blue, placing the white cot by the window where sunlight streamed in. The star blanket, folded at the foot of the cot, was a constant reminder that her decisions belonged only to her. She continued therapy, continued speaking in support groups, continued writing in the notebook her counselor had given her, each page filled with her own decisions, applying for the consulting job, choosing the baby's name, buying a rocking chair for the room. Every word written with her own hand was another brick in the foundation of her new life. One afternoon, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in golden hues, Ellie stopped at the window, her baby giving soft kicks beneath her palm. She whispered softly, "We are free. We are safe." Her father came up beside her, his voice warm. "You got your life back. No one will ever be able to take it from you again." Ellie smiled, her eyes shining. She knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she no longer felt trapped. She felt strong. She felt ready. The world's camera had once captured her pain. Now it could capture her resilience. She turned to the cot, touching the star blanket. "You're going to grow up knowing love, not fear," she whispered to her unborn son. And with that vow, the story of survival closed its chapter, not with silence, but with strength. Sometimes, evidence does more than just convict. It sets the truth free.